Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. Give it another minute or two for folks to join before we get started.
Okay, hold on then.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? We got a few things on the agenda today. Josh and Jeremy, I guess you have the first one. Go for
Yeah,
it.
sir. I moved myself up because I have to drop early.
Okay.
So let me see if I can share my screen. If not, I'll just have to tell you about things. Oh, I can't because you're blocking me from sharing my screen.
My bad. Yes, one
You want to
moment.
unlock that?
It's unlocked. Go for it.
Okay, now we'll see if it actually works. There we go. Okay, can people see that?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so these are our results. So we had 57 responses to the survey. The survey was only shared out on the SIG MC list. And I actually find the aggregate scores to be a little bit more useful, which is right here. So Supercluster had definitely had our highest aggregate score, mostly because it had the fewest people who hated it.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yep. So because, you know, if we go down to, so that, like I said, for the top ones, we have Supercluster, Cluster Group, Cluster Set, and Multicluster. And then we asked this sort of a second thing. By the way, we did provide people the opportunity to cite names that they thought should be blocked because they had problems. Most of the people showed by their responses that they didn't really understand this. The only one that actually seems to have a legitimate objection is that congregation, which was not terribly upvoted to begin with, was too religious to be usable. So it's actually interesting because for top preference, you know, we asked everybody which was their top choice. We're tied. Oh, we've gotten a few more responses, and now we're tied between Supercluster and Cluster Group. Before, Cluster Group actually was number one, but was not number one in the aggregate score because a bunch of people hated it. So now we're actually tied. So that would actually be an argument of, if we are done with the survey, that would be an argument for Supercluster. Now, after we ran this survey, people suggested a bunch of other names.
Yeah. They sure did, didn't they?
Yeah.
So I guess the
Of course
question
they
is,
did, because why wouldn't they? It would be a lot more, wouldn't be as much fun if people didn't submit things late.
So,
Do you,
uh,
Josh, do you have a list of the last latecomer names?
I do not have those compiled.
Were there
I
any that
wasn't
were
clear
good?
what we wanted to do with them. They were all on the mailing list, weren't they?
Actually, they're all in the spreadsheet now, I think.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing.
Yeah,
As soon as I
do we
figure
just
out
want to
how.
go through that like quickly? There's not nearly as many as last time. We can maybe go through them real quick.
Okay. Were there
And
any that
then
were good?
I wanted to just take a step back here really quick and say that I think so. I don't think that we should think of this as something that we have to commit to right away. I look at our determination of a name to be like, let's find maybe a next temporary name that comes from community input, and I think what solidifies the choice of the name and makes it permanent is when we have any API that references the name that moves to beta. Do people agree with that?
Sure. Alphas we can throw away.
Yeah. So let's
Well,
make sure we remember we're finding the next name to try on and see if it's okay.
So I will add to that though, like there's a DNS implication here. One of the criteria for beta too is that we pin down a DNS schema, and I know we use local for cluster, but like it's wrong. And in fact, I just noticed this. If you dig something.local address, it says you are experimenting with what happens when you put multicast DNS on the wire. So like we're clearly doing the wrong thing. I would like to have the discussion with SIGNet about like, let's pick a suffix that we can all agree on as the next one, whether that's XX or something else. And to do like this, it's a separate conversation. Right? It's the left side and the right side of this, of the dot. And yes, we're just trying it on until we go with beta. But I think that there are, like it's going to be sticky. That's what I guess I'm trying to say. Whatever we choose here is very likely to be the thing we choose in the end.
So one reason that I want to make sure that we think of like this is a little bit open-ended is because, and we'll talk more about this later on, is that it like later on in this meeting we have another agenda item for it. Is that we've like basically deferred the problem of like cluster registration type concerns, and there's a touch point with whatever name that we have with a future registration type concept. So I just want to make sure that we don't solve exclusively for the first case of like the one that we immediately face with DNS.
Fair enough. I'm happy to say that this is the working name, but in my mind, I'm looking for the real name. I just won't say that out loud ever again.
I get it. And ACK.
And I will also say, due to experiences, that if we pick a name, we're likely to end up using it.
That's my feeling too. That's exactly what I meant to express. You just captured in one sentence. Thank you.
Having been part of a few startups where we got to literally the day before launch when we realized we had not actually picked a release name and we're still using the working name. So
Well, case in point, Supercluster.
Supercluster,
Okay.
Kubernetes.
Yeah.
A previous project called Let Me Contain That For You. Like you're right, these things stick.
LMCTFI.
I wore the t-shirt yesterday and my kids were like, what does that mean?
Very few people would catch that reference, I think. Anyway, Jeremy, you were going to review the new names suggested after the poll opened.
Yeah, I think just in interest of fairness, like last time, we should go through them real quick. Tim, to answer your question, were there any good ones? There were some okay ones. Let's quickly decide as a group, maybe.
Okay.
I guess that was my nice way of saying I don't really think there's any strong contenders, but we'll see if anyone disagrees. Okay, so starting here, I think commingle was the last one we got to.
Yeah.
So contingent seems kind of weird to me. I don't know. It doesn't really seem to fit.
I don't think it's terrible, but I think it doesn't hold anything over the words we've already got.
Yeah.
Would that be strike through?
So
Or
that's a good question. Like the folks that suggested these, you know, I don't know. I've been wondering if we want to actually do another poll, since the first poll attracted so much more discussion than I anticipated.
I think another poll is a great idea. I just think we should kind of see if we can whittle the list down a little bit like last time first.
I
Yeah.
agree. If we can cut this list down to whatever the top 8 of the previous list plus the top 8 of this new set,
Yeah.
or 6 and 6 or something like that.
Exactly.
Actually,
Like I think. Or go ahead.
I would say we could narrow down the original list even further. There's a real kind of definite cutoff in what people already like. Like there's a whole bunch of, there's, I guess, about 6 names that have an aggregate score of 2.5 and above, and then we immediately drop to below 2. So
Okay, so that, yeah.
Okay.
So I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 clear front runners.
Okay.
In the old set.
So let's see if we can find max 5 out of this extra set. And as I'm scanning through it, I think that even might be a challenge.
Yeah, I can't say I actually like any of the new set.
Like I think we can rule out sort of out of hand. Basket is just going to be too generic. Case doesn't carry the real meaning.
I find WAD to be extremely amusing, but probably not.
I'm keen on Posse.
I like Bushel, but I think they really should have taken it the whole way, and we should use Hogshead.
So I think Vessel is doesn't quite carry the connotation that we need. Penier, I don't even know what it means.
Oh, I think that's pannier actually, which is it's a portable bag you put on your motorcycle or bicycle or horse.
Okay, no.
I have no idea what it has to do with anything.
It's a synonyms for basket.
Yeah, band is not.
Band of clusters.
I can see the TV show title for Band of Brothers with a bunch of Kubernetes logos, but no.
All right.
Posse in our current political context, probably not a good choice.
not good.
A troop. A troop is amusing, but it makes me feel like we're a bunch of clowns.
Yeah.
Goof troop.
WAD is great. We should keep WAD.
Yeah.
Glob, I think, was already suggested, wasn't it?
No, I think you're thinking of Clump.
Clump. Yeah,
which
your
is
favorite Clump.
The predestined winner, but maybe I just didn't say that out loud.
Okay, I'm fine with Glob.
Bunch?
No. Bushel. Pile, heap, stack, bouquet. I like bouquet.
I like bouquet too.
Wait, we did have Glob on the list that we already voted on.
I thought so.
Okay.
I felt like I had suggested Glob.
And let's see how it scored.
Bouquet.
Glob scored poorly. 27 of the 58 respondents hated it.
Okay.
Get him out of here.
We wanted to keep bouquet.
Yeah, bouquet I don't hate actually.
Yeah.
Collective. It has a nice connotation. Collective. Didn't we suggest that one too?
I think collective and collection were both in there before, but
maybe not.
We didn't vote on them. They might have been one that was. Oh wait, no, we did vote on them. Sorry, we do have collective. We just spelled it with a K, and that one again has only 3 people who really liked it, and it had 19 people who hated it.
Yeah.
All right, so that's
it's not even a front runner.
Collection.
I think it's too generic. School, I felt like we talked about before. Like it was
Well,
right
we
there with
had
like murder and flock and herd.
Shoal
Like,
and yeah. Um,
like honestly, we didn't give due consideration to murder, but you know.
I don't think that's a great idea.
How about a frustration of clusters?
Might be too
An
descriptive.
administrative headache of clusters.
A superset.
Superset.
Yeah.
It's okay. I don't think well, it's not really a superset. It's just a set, right? Like it seems like the
Yeah.
wrong description. Bag of clusters.
Bag.local.
Yeah.
Supercluster.bag.
I don't think bag is going anywhere. And cluster space. It's not awful.
Yeah,
I'm fine with that. Fellowship, good one, but I don't think it's gonna. I think it's too generic.
All right, and did we want to keep? Where did we start? Contingent.
I'm fine with keeping it. We can let people vote it down. I think
Okay.
it will sink, but
Cool. Okay, so yeah, so the new ones are contingent, wad, bouquet, and cluster space. But okay,
there we go.
so we could have a pretty, like we have 10 now with the
Runoff
original top
vote?
6. Oh, and then the other thing too is it was brought up that cluster group, right, is already
yeah.
in use.
Yes, I think we need to strike that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, what's wrong with cluster group?
It's already a
use.
term in a product in the ecosystem. And yeah, we won't be doing anybody any favors by picking something that already overlaps with the product. And I'm not personally willing to pay the time tax to explain that in every conversation potentially about this.
No. What's the product?
Tanzu.
Okay.
They've
That's major.
They've made noise about this as a primitive of their system, so like we should just hands off it.
Okay, cool. So that's 9 then?
I think 8 if we're only adding 4 new ones.
Perfect. Okay.
So.
And then I guess what do we want to do there? So send out the survey, maybe give it 2 weeks or something, or?
Well,
Sure.
I mean, if we're gonna do another survey, I kind of feel like we should throw it out to Kubernetes Dev.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
I think a wider distribution list would be great. It may attract a subsequent round of
We're not gonna do another
suggestions,
round.
but
I think it will definitely attract another round. But
Unless we get something that's like head and shoulders above what we've got, I think we should just not consider new suggestions. Unless it's obvious, we go, oh, that's it, that's the one.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there isn't a way within the survey for people to add new suggestions and other people to vote on them. And if so, I'm not sure that we would necessarily want one, because we could definitely end up with cluster McCluster face.
Yeah. Okay.
that's
yeah.
not a bad one.
So let me throw out an alternative, which would be that we buy a TLD. We all pool our money, buy ourselves dot multicluster, and we don't need a domain. We just buy a TLD.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I think it only costs like $400,000 to buy a TLD, and then you have to have a NIC that runs across the. Never mind, we're not doing this.
So we just have to turn Tim upside down and shake loose change out of his pocket for a good 10 seconds.
It's due to due to the flooding of the market, the price has dropped to 185K.
Okay.
Tim, we're losing money if we don't do it.
Look, I think I have a lot of foreign currency left over from travel in my drawer here. Let's see how much I get if I convert it back.
Think of all the time we'll save debating the suffix.
Yes.
Okay. I have to bounce at the half hour, so I think we're good on this, right?
Okay. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to put together a survey and throw it out to Kubernetes dev. And it'll be
Awesome.
formatted like the previous survey, except that I'm going to change how I ask for problem names because it was clear that people didn't really understand what we were asking for.
Perfect. And then do we
Thank
want
you,
to time
Josh.
box it?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think we want to give it more than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
There's
Great.
a lot of other people. I just noticed there's a lot of other participants here. I assume they're for later agenda items, but hey, everybody else who's listening, feel free to chime in.
Sure.
Okay.
So the next item on the agenda, I put on there, it's a follow-up to the discussion on next steps for cluster registry. And I know that Klaus and Rainbow Mango had some thoughts they wanted to share about this. Our previous kind of feeling was that we had talked about a few SIG meetings ago was that we didn't really want to be bound by the current implementation or current API in cluster registry, but we felt the concept was useful and one that we would be getting to naturally in the next couple beats of work. I don't think I need to re-summarize that any further though. So Klaus or Rainbow Mango, I am curious to know your thoughts.
Yeah, we are building a cluster management service, and which will rely on a cluster registry API, and so we don't want this cluster registry be abandoned. In addition, we would like to enhance the API, such as add the cluster capacity, like CPU memory, to the API. Seems Klaus Ma has a case, right?
Hi everyone. This is Klaus. We are building some, we are building Volcano to try to dispatch workload to different clusters. So we check which API we are going to use. So I found the cluster registry. The major requirement from Volcano community is that we would like to have some, API for different clusters, so they can register their endpoint and something else. So that will be great if we can have some some API in the upstream for different vendor or different cluster provider to register their cluster. So we are going to provide a kind of operator to forward our job to different clusters for this part. So from my point,
Go ahead. Sorry, that's okay. Please finish. Go ahead.
Yes. So my major requirement is that we would like to have a API in the upstream. So different vendor or different different version of Kubernetes can register their endpoint. So I can forward my workload to different cluster.
So what I hear from Klaus and Rainbow is that I hear that you want there to be an API, and I guess to be very clear, my own personal opinion is that I think that the registration concept is very valuable. I'm not at all like down on the concept of a cluster registry, but I do not see a reason that we should be bound by anything in the current one, because there is so very little there, and that there's not a great articulation of what it means to be in that registry, and how you might, for example, Rainbow Mango, you talked about extending the API with capacity, for example. I don't think that there is, like, currently there is no concept of any kind of software that runs in the cluster that you register, for example, to that would be able to write that capacity. And so I think that's a valid use case, but I think, just to be really clear, for me, the question is that something that we must base on the existing cluster registry project, or can we start fresh and sort of start from the beginning, especially given that we have a couple different functional domains that we're working kind of backwards from the most essential mechanics of between clusters, but without touching the registry concept yet. I think a couple beats from now, very shortly, we'll have a need to describe the properties of what a cluster registry might be. And that's my hesitation to keep the existing one alive. I think it would be easier to see and easier to think about if the existing one just wasn't there. My own, I'm curious to know what others think about that, and if what I said makes sense.
To me, it does make sense. I mean, I could see a world where, you know, we enumerate the use cases, and what we end up with actually looks like it maybe should evolve off the old cluster registry API. But I think the important thing is not trying to start there.
Here's another thing to just throw out there. A different concern is that there's a desire, I think, to, if possible, shrink what's in the Kubernetes org. If we were starting completely fresh and the cluster registry repository didn't exist, I feel like we would start it in Kubernetes SIGs. And that's another kind of reason in my own thought process to start fresh, start in Kubernetes SIGs, and before we create any new repository, carefully identify what the actual use cases are that we want to support and what the value proposition of the registration API is. How does anybody have thoughts or opinions on that?
Yeah. Sorry, just one question. Are we going to, for example, using a separate repo for the API and a repo for example, for the federation? Because you know, share some background about this question is that for example, for the Volcano, it's a kind of batch system, you know, focus on the batch workload. So we may not use the federation, but we would like to use the cluster registry for the batch system for the job. So yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. The time delay makes it difficult to know when you're finished. Please go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. So that would be great if I can just import for example, just import the API to for the batch scenario.
So I absolutely think that, like, whatever final cluster registry concept we align on in the Cube community should be independent of federation and really independent of any other use case too. Like there has to be a durable and easy to understand value proposition and capabilities just from the registry. And that's one of the things that seemed to cloud the registry concept previously, is that we didn't really have any counterexample to federation that we were talking about in this SIG. And I think like if we had made a better distinction and maybe had some counterexamples that were different from federation, that we might have wound up with a more usable first attempt at a cluster registry, but we didn't. And that's another kind of motivation in my mind to take the lessons from it, but not to couple to the implementation. So let me ask a slightly different question. Rainbow and Klaus, would it serve your purpose if instead of keeping the old cluster registry around, that we begin to collect use cases for what we think the scope of a Kubernetes community cluster registry type piece of software would be, and begin to explore that concept?
For the current repo, is there any? Do we know any user of the current repo?
So I am not aware of any current piece of software that actually uses it. And I think one of the reasons for that is that you can't actually do anything with the cluster registry currently. There's no controllers that back it. It's just an API. So there's not really anything that you can use it to do, which is another reason I'd rather sort of like start with a clean piece of paper and talk about what would we want it to do. So for example, I see, Hector, you've got an agenda item after this about the poll reconciliation federation cap. One example might be if you want to write some kind of poll reconciler. Is that something that the cluster registry can help you with? Or that you'd want to get from the cluster registry?
So we are not using cluster registry. We are not using cluster registry, and yeah, I don't think it will help anything on that. At least probably historically, probably will help the cluster API definition and how the API types were defined. But we are not considering using it at this point.
Right, I don't mean the current cluster registry. I mean that if you want to solve a problem like poll reconciliation, is that a use case that a future cluster registry concept could help accelerate? Does the question make sense?
Yeah, I don't see how it can fit now, but yeah, I cannot answer that question, to be honest.
So
yeah. I mean, Qfit clusters should be clusters defined somewhere, right? So that probably could fit into that, right?
Mm-hmm. So I feel like I've talked a lot. I'd like to hear what other people have to say and what they think.
I mean, from my perspective, it seems like, so Klaus, Rainbow, we've got a couple of use cases for an API. With multi-cluster services, I think we have another one, like controllers are going to need some kind of registry, and in the API spec today, we've kind of hand waved that away, right? We've said, you know, an implementation can provide one, but, you know, I think a standard common API that various controllers and tools can count on makes sense. Maybe we should, you know, if there's nothing particularly about the current cluster registry that is important, and it's really about having something common and community maintained, maybe we can all start, you know, a doc to kind of brainstorm the various requirements and things we want to get out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like a valid point to me. Yeah.
So one thing that I've learned a lot about in my Cube experience is not to tell yourself that you have to make a decision when you don't have to. So I don't think that this meeting, like the fate of cluster registry as it exists today, hangs in the balance. I'd like to, so one of the things that we should do is we should, and I accept responsibility for not having done this before. I think that we should solicit opinions on the mailing list so that folks that are not present in the meeting today can share their thoughts about it. But I think that we can also begin to collect use cases for what we think a Kubernetes community level cluster registry concept should be able to facilitate or make possible. That way we're not going to go and like delete anything today, but I don't think that we should delete something without more than just a vague verbalized notion in a SIG meeting that we're going to replace it eventually with something. So either way, I would like, I think maybe a sensible way to proceed would be to start collecting use cases and see if there's any other opinions present by mailing the list. Does that sound like maybe a sensible way to proceed?
Sounds good to me.
I think that's reasonable.
And perhaps that collection of use cases can eventually mutate into a KEP for building the cluster registry, whether that's in the current location or in a new location, just as a thought about maybe where it could progress.
Yeah. I think the user case and the scenario is really important. So whether we continue use the current repo or we start another one, start from scratch, I think those are fine to me.
Okay. I tell you what, I'll take an action item to start a document where we can begin to collect use cases and mail the list. And solicit opinions.
Yeah.
Sound okay to everybody?
That's great.
Awesome.
All right. Hector, I think you're up next if there's nothing else folks want to say about cluster registry for now.
Yeah.
And by the way, thanks a lot, Klaus and Rainbow, for joining us to talk about this. I know I think it's late for both of you, so thanks a lot.
Yes, that's my pleasure. That's interesting. Yeah.
Great, go for it, Hector.
Thank you for your time, guys. So yeah, basically, initially I wanted to encourage people to share the feedbacks about two KEPs that they opened. One related to the status update of federated resources, where mainly the intention is to kind of increase or improve the type of conditions that we have, or the type of status values that we have when we federate resources. That until now we have propagation, and we have like propagation timeout and creation timeout and stuff. So the main intention is to follow another approach that has been shared in the CAP, where you can extend the condition and define types like ready or show, that will be very useful when you are having when you're federating resources such as deployments, right? Where you really want to know if a federated resource is ready or not just simply if it has been created or it failed the creation. That was one that I wanted to share, but please go to the CAP and we can keep the discussion on that. But let's say the most relevant and one was being awaiting for long before, it was about the pull reconciliation regarding QFED. Irfan, I know that he shares some thoughts on the CAP, but again, please jump in and start to make questions or doubts. And yeah, initially the intention is to, well, considering probably to keep a feature gate where you can choose probably between a push and pull reconciliation. It was not defined as such in the CAP, but yeah, we have in mind that before, so probably we don't really want to kind of cut everything has been done until now. So having a feature gate where you can have or choose whether you want pull or push reconciliation model that will probably be a really good approach and will help to iterate over this pull reconciliation. The other intention that we have is to have watch on so have daemons that we call, so we will have QFED daemons on each QFED cluster, and those will be in charge to watch on the federated types that they are defined on the control plane. So then we will have to have a kind of a watch informer taking a look in the control plane to know which are the new federated resources, and then so apply the reconciliation in the remote classes. Then with this, more or less, this functionality will define this pool model. The other approach we share in the CAP, however, yeah, maybe we should probably follow an iterative approach. It was to follow exactly the same again approach or model that the virtual kubelet did. So we conceived the QFED daemons to be has a virtual kubelets at some point, where not the same because we are not talking to the container on time, but in the meaning of having certain endpoints that we can extend in the future. So probably we can even in the future expose functionalities such as, I don't know, let's imagine having a kubectl log federated to the deployment, where you can from the control plane or a different cluster, you can see the logs of federated deployment in a specific cluster, right? So that was the intention of exposing certain endpoints that the control plane will have to pull, but we are open. I say we, but yeah, I assume that everyone is all right with this to probably follow an iterative approach in this CAP while using the same or the current model, where we are currently using the client.go to talk to the remote cluster to know if the cluster API is all right. Otherwise, to fetch the resources by using the client.go instead of having these endpoints. So the idea of the endpoints, again, was mainly to be able to expose additional functionalities that we could do with the federated resources in the remote cluster, rather than replacing the current status and cluster health checks, how it works in the push reconciliation mode. So yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So as I kind of referenced before, I think pull reconciliation use cases in KubeFed are are probably rife with use cases that may be more universal than that and may just apply to cluster registry. So I'd love, once we've got like a doc started, Hector, I'd love for you to kind of track that and see if there's anything that really rings the bell as like, that resonates with commonality between those cluster registry use cases and ones that fold up into the KEPs that you mentioned. When I took a look at your pull reconciliation KEP, I felt like this is really, really similar to it's very similar to the mechanics that you would need for pull reconciliation of the work API. So I'll be curious to see if as we kind of start roughing the cluster registry use cases out, whether you wind up seeing the same kind of overlap that I'm getting a gut impression about. The only other thing that I'll say about what you brought up is when it comes to the status API, the thing that I would think very carefully about is what kind of QPS you will be getting yourselves into if you have a controller that's continually updating the status of the federated resources in the federation API. Like that might wind up being a lot of writes. Have you thought about what kind of quasi properties you would say that such an API had? Like maybe it gets updated, but it only gets updated like every 5 seconds or something like that. Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, so I don't know if that was intentional, but based on the current functionality, correct me if I'm wrong, when you get clusters of resources that they are not, let's say, for instance, propagation timeout or something like that, you just update the status of the resources where the propagation failed, right? You don't really kind of write down that all the other resources status is ready or is all right, right? Mm-hmm. So in that sense, yeah, I have the same thoughts, and the intention probably is to simply take those that we are not satisfying the condition only, instead of having to write all the time, yeah, this is ready constantly, in some overload. What do you think?
I think it's something to think really carefully about, because it will, like the QPS needed to do those writes is going to vary linearly in the size of the number of resources that you use Federation to deploy. So you don't, I think you want to avoid like a thundering herd type effect. And so it's worth thinking very carefully, if you want to do that, to add that type of API surface, about what you think the total number of QPS that you'd be willing to allocate to those status updates in the hosting cluster would be, and how you would adjust that dynamically, or if you would, based on the number of resources deployed ultimately. So
sorry, go ahead.
And just one final thing, think about, limits of scale that you want to make a guarantee that it's possible to support this many clusters and this many resources. It's pretty strongly linked with that QPS number and how to control that.
Yeah, it sounds reasonable. Yeah, I will investigate more about that. Good point. Thanks.
No problem. Well, I think we're at time today, folks. I guess we'll see you all next week. Thanks a lot, everybody, for joining. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Bye.